Good morning. Ooh. Good morning. One more time. Good morning. Like this. If you're in the room thinking you're for Azure storage, you're in the wrong room. I was all set up over the security session. We had to do some logistics, so I apologize if you're in the wrong room, or if you think people over there that should be here, let them know. My name is Bret Arsenault. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Microsoft, and I was asked to fly to Florida to talk about how we protect Microsoft. So this isn't a vendor pitch, this isn't a product pitch. I'll talk about what we've learned in protecting Microsoft, just like you would think about protecting any other enterprise. See, there goes the person. Yeah. Doesn't even care about cybersecurity. And so, I'm just kidding. And so, I thought I'd come down and just give you a little bit of an inside view of how we do things from a process perspective and some of the technologies that we use and how we use those technologies, so that you've heard about why we're here. And really, I was hoping to make it something that have some So with that, this is, again, just my perspective on how to protect Microsoft as a corporation as they're thinking about protecting any other company. So my thought was, let's talk about the environment that we have. I think a lot of people have this misperception about the environment that I protect. Our approach and how we go do it, which we changed fairly significantly in the last 2 years, in terms of simplifying it and how we make it. I always say, excuse me, from customers and partners, I always get asked, what was your journey into cloud like? Obviously, we went early on our internal line of business applications and app portfolio to the cloud. So what did you do? And probably more importantly, if we go back to the overall session agenda, learn, connect, and explore. I thought I'd share some of the things we learned 7 years later on our transformation and our journey to the cloud that you may or may not find useful. And I'm hopeful that you will do that, I think. So as far as that goes, after that, I thought I'd give a couple of examples that I think are sort of marquee examples of the types of things we've been doing that are kind of interesting, or maybe not. We'll find out what you think about it. Some of these are things you'll be able to do. Some of these are things you'll get from us in the future product. And some of these you'll have to make a decision depending on your risk knowledge if you want to go do it on as part of AC. So these are not just product plays. Some of the stuff we've done definitely one of these. And then just a quick view of what we call first-party products. Of course, I am like many of you, just out of curiosity, since I'm using this practice, how many of you are working for companies that have 500 people or more? Great. And how many for 5,000 or more? And how many for 10,000 or more? Awesome. So I'll talk about a number of things. So for those of you who have 5,000 or more, I'm assuming, one more show of hands, how many of you have more than 20 security vendor products in your company? Aha. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. How many of you would like to cut that in half? And how many of you don't want to cut it in half? It's okay if you don't want to. Okay, so I'll explain a little bit in the journey. We had over 80 security products when I took this role 8 years ago, and we have been on a similar path as you, which is purely for vendor management, entropy, and significance. How do we reduce that, both using our own products and other things that we go forward, and I can talk about that a little bit as well. So that was really the context of the discussion. Given that, and I did ask this to be a friendly audience, this was the hardest part about the room shift. I decided I would do a really simple thing. I would plant 3 questions and $300 bills under your seats, taped under your seats. So moving those here, I'm not going to lie to you, I couldn't find one of the questions. It's still in the other room. So if you quickly look under your seat, luckily I didn't lose the money. You look under your seat, they're gold envelope. They look like that. Thank you, you've made my point. You've all just been phished. Do I look like a Nigerian prince who needs money? No. So, just to point out the fact that I have the same problems you all have, which is users are both my first line and my last line of defense. And so how do I use those effectively? And I'll talk a little bit about that as I go through the conversation. Did anyone find the envelope, just out of curiosity? So should we try it again? Yeah, no, okay. So I've lost any kind of trust with this group at all. I know that's not a good way to start. We no longer have a rapport and a relationship. I apologize. Okay, so the environment we work in, I love this. This is the beauty of data. It gets updated in a month. What does it show me? Really simple. This is an awesome board of directors slide to show, which is a great picture. There are more bubbles, and the bubbles are getting bigger. It's the easiest way of saying attacks are more frequent and the impact is much larger. That's it. That's all it is. See? Simple. Next. You already know that. What's the environment we work in? I hate this slide, but I put it in anyway. And I'll tell you why. Because it looks like we have 125,000 employees, which we do, 70,000 vendors who are badged people that work in our environment, about just under 600 sites. We used to have 700,000 SharePoint instances, which was always interesting to me because there's only 200,000 people. So we had this 5-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio of SharePoint sites to people. With SharePoint Online, it's much more manageable and under control, which I think is awesome. My team takes in about 20 billion security events a day that we manage and work through with various systems. And then obviously we do an awful lot of Skype for Business. But the bottom line, which is the one which I like, but I don't like, because it doesn't tell the whole story. So yes, I have a lot of Windows 10 in my environment. In our environment, we support 32 versions of operating systems, which is not all Windows. So what this doesn't show you is the fact that we have over 500,000 Linux hosts in the company. It also doesn't show you I'm probably the second largest Mac shop in the world, other than a small Apple company down in the valley. I also have about 80,000 Android and iOS devices, mobile devices that we manage as well with conditional access. And so people always say, oh, it's really easy because you just run all Microsoft stuff. But the reality is, not only do I run a very heterogeneous environment, I also happen to run this one thing most other people don't run, which is Windows version N+1 as opposed to N-1. So when things like Adobe Flash don't work, it's not supported on the next version of Windows. And so there's this issue with all of our third-party products being supported on a vast array of people who are doing early testing for early components of all of our applications, because we have this model where we try to ensure we use our products early and first, including our vendor products like SAP, on a platform that technically wouldn't be supported, that you would never do. But we do that to ensure that when the product does ship, hopeful that it both has the feature set and the scalability and deployability of the things that you would expect as an enterprise customer. So this is just sort of the environment to give you a backdrop of why we built and did some of the decisions in the programs that we've built inside of the company. And you'll see that most of our SharePoint stuff is in the cloud. I wasn't planning on talking about it, but I might, if asked a question, prompted about our insider threat program that uses SharePoint Online in ways we could never do in our on-premise version. And then, of course, our sales team uses our CRM Online solution. But again, a fair amount of non-Microsoft platform and products, as well as even some security play products. Okay, because my job, first and foremost, is to protect the company, not to use the products. Opportunities. So this is just that big picture thing, right? Lots of cool globalization stuff, ability to do massive things with data. I'm going to focus on the right side. So in my role, I have responsibility for information security at Microsoft, as well as business continuity and disaster recovery, which is an interesting thing to have to get to do. Part of the reason for that in the learnings was, though, understanding the ability to respond and recover from threats, much like program. Certainly prevention is important, but I think many people spend too much time focusing on just prevention and not how you do the recovery. And if you look at Wall Street in the instances that have happened, it's usually somebody's inability to deal with the response that causes more problems than what actually happened in that scenario. So if you live in an assumed breach mentality in a zero trust environment, you actually are always working on and exercising how you do the response capability. So that's the risk management side of the job. The thing I probably think is most interesting, probably twofold. Number one, this lovely term, excuse me, this lovely super clear. However, there's a certain trend going on globally around where data should live and data sovereignty within country borders. And so to the extent that that is to help the constituents of said country or users of services, that's fantastic. To the extent it's used instead as a model to keep business inside boundaries, becomes a very interesting and fine line to cross, because you lose all the benefits of the scale if you do that. So I said we have 596 locations. I can't have 596 data centers. It's just not possible. It's not economically feasible. So I worry about how do you ensure and provide geographic board. That's a big, big thing we have to work on. The other thing that's a big step rate change for us, this year is the first year, or the end of last year, beginning of this year, was the first time that the money made in cybercrime surpassed all illicit drug trade combined. And so now you just have a very different dynamic and economic model that's going on. It's pretty interesting. We do a lot of study of drug cartel to understand the evolution of that and how it relates to these things. And so people are starting to disrupt and use it in ways that are not unexpected. I mean, come on, like seriously, we had, when we created the postal system, you had mail fraud. When we created the telephony industry, you had wiretapping and wire fraud. So it's not surprising with internet you're going to see internet and cybercrime. I'm not surprised by it. But how do we learn from those things in the past and apply them going forward? And then the third biggest trend on the risk side, from my perspective, has been the issue with supply chain. I think supply chain is probably the area that I think is the most rife for the ability to use different technologies and processes to improve our ability to protect it. And to be fair, a lot of that has been the shining of the light of that, not that people haven't known, has been GDPR. Right? And so with GDPR, you realize, one, you have a time-bound constraint for responding, which makes things very tough. And so the further away things are from you, the harder it is to meet those obligations and the harder it is for you to have true assurance. So what do you think and do about those kinds of things? And that's really it. I think this idea that we've been saying for a long time, identity is the new perimeter. I have realized I have overstated this. I'm not saying that network controls aren't still interesting. They're just not sufficient. And I tell my team, all the time that identity is our new perimeter. And I lost a couple of my network people because they thought I didn't care about network. So it's not that I don't care about network. I just know it's necessary but not sufficient as a control point for our security programs. And that's really it. Those are the risks. So what do we do about it? What's the approach? So the company approach is fairly straightforward, which is we have security operations, we have technologies we provide both in terms of on-premise and cloud services and products. And then, of course, we have partnerships with government, partnerships with OEMs, partnerships with ISVs, and partnerships even with our customer base. And so this discussion is mostly purely about the security operations of protecting our company. It's not a lot about, I mean, I'll talk about some of the tech, but it's not a tech pitch. And I'm not here to talk about some of the amazing work we do with the partnerships with law enforcement and other things. It's just not the scope of this conversation. So I'm just sort of setting the tone for this. Make sense? We all right so far? You're happy? If you're happy, I'm happy. What about you over there in the green shirt with your arms crossed? You happy? Oh, you're happy? Good. Then I think we're good. 2 people are happy. We can move forward. Excellent. All right. Why would I talk about leadership principles? One of my most favorite conversations was in New York City, and with a bunch of some of the top security people, quote-unquote top security people, self-proclaimed, from around the world. And one of these people, super sharp, we were talking about leadership principles and a couple things. One, how do you attract and retain really good and diverse talent? And two, what do you think about it's basically a bunch of organ leadership conversations, to which this person said, that's all phooey. I won't say who he is. He's not in the industry anymore. That isn't why. And he said, that's all phooey. Just give me a good cryptographer and we'll solve all of security, which is an interesting way of looking at the problem. But it's not. I think security is, and particularly this role as CISOs, for those who have security roles or have people who work with them or for them that are security officers, the role's changed a lot. And it's a business leadership role like any other role. And so there's a bunch of tech that you have to know to be decent at it. But it still is about, how do you make the right decisions? Do you make the timely enough fashion? And can you get the right people and support around you, which is the skills and systems to support your strategy. So one of the things this company did in change of leadership was to really simplify how we think about leadership inside of Microsoft. And so why does this relate to security? One of the things I love, every person, whether you're talking to the CEO or a dev or a tester or any other component, is you sort of ask these 3 questions at review time. Does that individual create clarity? Do they generate energy? And do they deliver success? Those are it. We used to have 10 value systems and everything else. These are the 3 for the company. And it's a really, really good thing to do because deliver success is fairly straightforward. I think most people are pretty familiar with how to measure and report on and talk about deliver success at an individual, group, and corporate level. But the idea of creating clarity and generating energy, and create clarity for me was a big deal, which is to synthesize the complex, ensure a shared understanding, and define a course of action. And so I looked in the mirror and I said, what am I doing with regard to this? How am I doing as a leader in terms of that with the program we built? I have an amazingly smart significant other who reminded me on numerous times to put down my .5 leaded engineering pencil and get out a crayon if I want to be more successful. And it was actually a really good point, which is if you start drawing with crayons and you make things simple, it was just sort of the simple analogy is if you can get 100% of the people to buy into 10% of where you need to go and do, you're better off than 10% of the people understanding 100% what you're trying to do. And in security, I think that's really true. We have over 100 different services and programs my team runs, but I was just confusing our user base and our engineering population with overly complex design and systems and trying to make everybody a security expert. Everybody needs to care about security, but it's not everybody's job in terms of direct responsibility. So what is that? So we said, hey, what if we went back and tried to do this, generate clarity, get out a crayon, and synthesize the complex? And so what you're going to see is a result of that work. Now, I asked you at the beginning, and you've been very participatory, so thank you. And I know I have no reason to believe you'll engage anymore after what I started this with. But let's just assume I did. How many of you, show of hands, believe you're overpaid to do your job? Yeah. How many of you have your manager sitting next to you? This man is overpaid. I want to talk to him after. How many of you believe you're underpaid to do your job? This is always interesting. How many believe you're paid just right? This is awesome. So, it depends on the day for me, whether I'm overpaid or underpaid to do my job. What I'm about to show you is a very monumental moment for me because this is the day I feel I was grossly overpaid to do my job, which is great because I don't feel that's that often. So, simplify the complex. There we go. This is it. 100 and something programs, and I realize it's not. Like we have a lot of people inside who are arguing, and you can imagine who. If you just have strong identity, why burden people with managing devices and device health and group policy and all these other things? And why do you need all that data and telemetry? And so we realized that while the end goal of what I do is information protection, ultimately that's what I'm here to do for the company, it really only is based on three big things that have to get done. It's these three simple things. If you connect to any of my services or systems on-premise or in the cloud, mine or someone else's, you have to have a really strong identity. And it has to be multi-factor auth. It's just simple. Simple to say, not so simple to do, but I understand that. Number two, if you have great identity, make sure you're coming from a healthy device. And again, I don't have all Win 10, I have all kinds of different devices. So how do I ensure the device is actually healthy when it gets to the system? And number three, remember the 20 billion events I had? It's critical that I get the data and telemetry from either the services I build or the cloud services I consume or the places I go, so that I can use that analytics to, one, both improve the user experience and the systems and tools we build, but two, most importantly, for what I do, I can protect it, because that's where we get all of our really good machine learning and AI applied algorithms to the large data sets that we have. And before the cloud, even though I have a reasonably large organization, the ability for those things to be accurate is not as good as they are when I combine it with all the cloud data and put the two together and marry them. And so the idea is, how do I ensure I have that? So those are the three things: data and telemetry, identity, and device health. And then it's all built on a risk management platform, which is how I prioritize all the work that I go do, because I have a much longer list of work to do than I have resources. And so how do I make sure I'm working on the right things at the right time, which is just a leadership discussion. So this is really simple. But the key to this is how do we map that back to a way that maps to the services. Now, here's the part that's overpaid. Many people would say, well, we're just going to do really strong identity and give you really good, but the device health thing has always been this funny issue. We could have lots of discussions about MDM. I would be happy to do that. I might do that on Wall Street a lot. But then we said, we're going to make a graphic to make it super obvious to our executives, which apparently I'm you on it. That, oh my God, the build went away. I love that build. I want to do that one more time because I love that build. If we break one leg of the stool, and we add sound, all the information falls to the floor. This seems really simple, but it turned out to be super helpful in having conversations with a bunch of people. So take those 5 principles and map them to all the services we run. And so now it's really simple. This is just a DevOps model. Those 5 things you saw, risk management, identity, data, device health, data and telemetry, information protection, are my 5 investment pillars. Every single thing I do falls into one of those categories. Some fudge a little. but they all fit in there. And so you go from hundreds of services to thinking about it just like you think of building product, which I was the CTO before this in the product division. And it's really simple. You're vision-led and you build product. And so it doesn't matter what company. You don't have to be a tech company. That's how things work with the DevOps model. So we have 5 investment pillars, and we treat it like running a factory. These are the 27 services I need to run the factory. Some span those, right? Examples, business response and crisis management. Yeah, and Maria, that's my team. We stood up 7 different things because we had a lot of natural disaster this year. Identity management. What are we doing around administrator role services, auth, cert, provisioning? This is all the stuff, if you're a car manufacturer, you use to run the factory. It runs forever. I don't put this in the run, grow mentality of IT. It's not a run, grow comment, but it is the things that it's not an accounting exercise. It is just an exercise in the team and understanding what we do and making sure we have shared understanding. Data and telemetry are critical for me. Probably my biggest investment in the last 5 years is building massive data and telemetry systems. So we take in 470 different source feeds for our intelligence system, store those, and then parse those back out against all the services and products in real time and what happens in that space. We continue to enhance monitoring. And so again, made big investments 7 years ago on that. And then a lot of work around insider threat and threat intelligence this year were some of the big things that we were working on. And then, so this is why information protection is interesting to me. All of these things are crew to information protection. DLP is just one of the tools, which to be honest, I was over-invested in 3 years ago and realized I should invest more in the pillars to drive better data protection. So this is really simple. I have these 27 services. I know how many services go there. But how do I, if I was using the automotive plant analogy, I want to get into hybrid. What do? I build epics. So I have 11 epics. I had 13. I'd love to only have 10. These are things that last no more than 18 to 24 months. There are things that we are either behind that we want to go double down an effort on. There's something we haven't completed and we need extra energy to go get it done, like getting our multi-factor auth completely done. Eliminating passwords, which we are 90-something% done with eliminating passwords in the company. And so those are all epics. And 3 things happen to an epic in the 18 to 24-month window. Could be faster depending on what you do. What do you think they are? It's really pretty straightforward. An epic either becomes its own service down below, right? So again, when you do hybrid, do you become part of an existing line? Like, does Taurus just have a hybrid line, or does it become its own line? Or, and I use Ford as an example, no, just to be illustrative. Or, do you build its own complete line? It becomes its own service that runs on for purchase. So insider threat's a good example where it is just now running across as its own service. Or lastly, and this is the most important thing I think, it goes away. Right? It turns out that it just wasn't that interesting. We tried some things, they turned out not to bear value, and so we got rid of them. I have a small team of 9 people. That's not true. It's a team of 30 people, of which 9 to 10 people, strictly work on emerging threat and emerging technologies, things that are way out that we don't know if they're real or not. And so some of those things just go away. They turn out not to bear fruit. And so that's the 3 things that happen. The great part of this is that this all goes into VSO. All the user stories, all the epics, all the tasks, everything in here is all mapped in our VSO. So you treat it like a dev product. And you just build the things out and you go down that path. So that's really, as I said, it seems really simple in hindsight to do this, but it's been really helpful to ensure that every stakeholder in the business, whether you're building Office or Dynamics or SQL Server, it's super helpful for them to understand where these things are, what we're doing, and what we bet on, and what priorities we need them to do regarding data telemetry, identity, the information protection, and of course, the device health. And it's been a really big sea change for us in that regard. So it's been super helpful. Again, credit to my significant other who said, this is the example of using the crayon. Now, it also makes it, what I didn't expect, and has been super helpful, is I use this with my vendors. Going back to my vendor count. So guess what, Mr. or Mrs. Vendor? Show me on this path where you're going to make me either more efficient or more effective. And if you can't, then there's no reason to have a conversation because I'm already down this far on this path. Or if you think there's something I've missed, then you can go work with my emerging team and let me know, and then they'll come back and tell me whether it's really interesting or not. And so it's been super effective in how we work with and manage our vendor relationships, including, of course, Microsoft is a vendor. And so I would encourage you to use that with us too. And so these are sort of the simple things. Make sense? So, overpaid, underpaid. Like I saw a lot of people taking pictures, and I see a lot of people use this after I leave. And so I think, are these available, Tricia, these slides? So you can use these slides. You can do whatever you want. You can map your things to it. Your epics would be different than mine, right? but many of your services will probably be pretty similar. I don't think they'll be radically different. And my team gets mad sometimes because this simplifies some things. It doesn't call out like all the stuff we do on static code analysis in detail. I go, nope, don't need to. Like the devs know what we have to do. We have a process for making that happen. So it's not exhaustive, but it is really, really helpful in simplifying what we do. So on the create clarity, check. Got that part. We've done a better job on creating clarity. Deliver results. Well, luckily you're not doing my review, so we won't worry about that. Creating energy, though, is a different one. That's that third peer. As security professionals, I create a lot of energy. Some energy is good. Some energy is not so good. So I haven't figured out that. Maybe next year I can come talk about the best ways to create energy that are good and bad. But let me give you some examples, because there are some examples where we've created really good energy this year by really changing the way we think about and talk about being vision-led. So instead of talking about MFA, because MFA, the multi-factor auth or two-factor auth, seems rather draconian and heavy-handed, and we talk about in our service. But instead we talk about eliminating passwords. And eliminating passwords for a user is an awesome thing. Telling users you're going to implement MFA is not an awesome thing. It's just general social reaction to those kinds of things. And so let me walk you through a couple of examples that I think were helpful to us in learning this in the security perspective. And let me start with the question that I get most from customers, which is the journey to the cloud, because the security people would always say no before a lot of other people on their journey to the cloud. So remember the backdrop. Lots of SharePoint, lots of mail, lots of code, and lots of line of business applications to run a company of our size. And I'm sure many of you have the same thing. So when we did this, we made a goal to move 95% of our application base to Azure. And there's a lot of constraints we had. We had business requirements and technical requirements for the app portfolio that we had. But as opposed to just moving everything over, first we said right size it. Right? Eliminate before you automate, I think, is the tagline, and I love it, which is get rid of 30% of the stuff you don't need. Even in my own portfolio, I've reduced about 20%, 25% of the applications that were just dangling. It could be a dangling participle if we want to do language references, but they just need to go away. They either need to get modernized or cleaned up. And so this was a good change moment to go through and clean up a lot of the IT line of business functions that we had. So first thing was get rid of 30% of the stuff. Just get rid of it. Stop managing that over the 2,000 plus line of business applications we had. Number two, convert as much of it as you could to a SaaS platform, because that's the most leveraged, best economical model if you can get a SaaS platform to go do that. And so we spent a fair amount of time on that, like SharePoint Exchange and things like that, which was super helpful. We also used some other parties like Concur and other things. And through acquisition, we use even some other ones. And so that was a fairly straightforward model that we had. Then the third step was virtualize everything in our own data centers. Because when you virtualize everything, right, at the time we were probably 50% virtualized. We went to about almost 90% virtualized. And then when you move it to a cloud, particularly if you're doing infrastructure as a service, it's just a lift and shift, which we thought was pretty smart. I'm not saying it was, but we thought at the time it was pretty smart. So in that category, you have about 50% of the portfolio that we originally started with will move to the cloud. And we sort of thought about it and we said, listen, anything that's simple and new will move to PaaS. Anything that was existing or just, we'll call it run in the IT sense, we would remain in an IaaS VM. And then the other stuff would be just a lift and shift. Now, these numbers are revisionist history. Originally, it was flipped. We thought 35%, which is of the 50%, which is a large percentage, we were just going to lift and shift. We really were on a path which is only net new or completely re-architected applications would be moved to PaaS, because it's a lot harder to go do, or so we thought. And so we did a bunch of lift and shift to IaaS and had to do all the network infrastructure to make all the controls still work. And so in the backdrop of what's going on from a security perspective, we have 205 controls we measure and monitor for any application that we want to move, whether it's on cloud or not. If the capability wasn't in the cloud service in the fabric, then you had three options, right? You always have to just manage your risk. So you either build your own custom solution to solve the problem, say encryption, buy a third party, or you accept the risk. You just say, I'm going to risk accept it and I'll run it. I'm not saying that's what we did. I'm just saying that was a set. And so as you watch the maturity of the cloud over the last 4 years, we kept getting more and more capability in the security controls that were provided natively in Azure, as an example. Same for other cloud platforms. And so we had to do less custom work and more just being able to natively use the fabric, which made using paths a lot more sensible and a lot more effective. Because remember at the beginning I said one of the things I have is business continuity disaster recovery. So when you lift and shift an IaaS application into any cloud provider, you don't really get any of the true value of the elasticity or the geo-redundancy of a cloud. You still have to run and build network connections to other centers. You have to put data in other places, and you'll do that in the application. In paths, you just check a box. And you say, I want this data to be living in this geo-fenced area. Make sure your listens. And you get all that benefit for it. So we over-functioned on the lift and shift VM stuff and didn't do enough directly to paths. And we went back, and that's one of the biggest lessons we learned, particularly in any web application. The amount of effort it took to move an on-premise web app to a PaaS app was so small, we should have actually targeted that first. And that's why you see the numbers here. If I was to do it now, 35% of our stuff would have just gone straight to PaaS, and we'd get all that benefit of the geo-redundancy capability, the failover capability, and all the other things that come as part of a PaaS service. So that's fantastic. And then, of course, there's about 5% of the stuff that still remains on-prem. And so I love my customers. They're awesome. But every time I made this one statement, it would always come back to me back channel. Why do you tell customers you're going to leave 5% of your data on the cloud? So, well, because I am. There's certain problems that I have that just don't make sense for me to move over. I have a Genesis problem. I have an identity system. If I was ever to lose the back end of a cloud service, I'd have to rebuild it from somewhere. And I can't rebuild it from the same place. Right? So I'm going to always have that system, that capability that will be our on-prem solution. It says nothing about the cloud service. It's just a simple physics problem. So we have that capability we have to go do. And so there's some things we'll leave there. What I did say, where I think I was probably wrong, well, I wasn't probably wrong, and I'm sure a friend of mine in the audience is writing this down. I was wrong, was I thought we would move our SaaS instance because business need and security, obviously our financial systems and people stuff is really important to us, would be one of the later things for us to move. But it turns out SAP did a much of amazing work with us on Azure, and we also moved our SAP instance to Azure as well. And so that's also a cloud service. And I would have thought that would have taken us longer to get there. But so that was number one, do paths earlier than you think. Number two, as I said, there's this line, I really should show it to you. It's a graph of all the capabilities relative to our controls that became native in the cloud service. But if I showed you the apps that transitioned, they diverge. More controls, easier to move app, number of apps moving, asymptotic flat line, logarithmic view at 56%. Never got over that, didn't get past the mark. Why? Because for a long time people say, oh, the security team says we can't do it. And I go, no, I never say you can't do it. You can either fix it natively, do extra work, or risk accept it. It's your choice. Like, you have to have a certain level of risk acceptance to do it, but you can do that. And so it turns out there is this thing we found out. This was probably the most interesting thing I learned around this, which is FUI. Anyone know what FUI is, besides a cartoon character from way back when? It turns out, this is the beautiful thing about having a person on your team, remember I said about people, was doing his PhD in maladaptive behavior. That's a good thing to have if you're trying to get people to do things, and there's, they fall into 4 categories of types of behavior they do in prediction. This is one of those things, though, why did we stop progressing at this 56% point? And it turns out these 6 things under FUI are true. These are the 6 reasons why people don't do something. I don't care if it's your daughter, your son, your spouse, your brother, your sister, your parents, anybody, your worker, your coworker, your boss, subordinate. These are the 6 reasons why people don't do these things. They don't think it's fair. They fear it. They don't understand it. They don't understand that it's not urgent. They're entitled. I don't know if you have any users like that. Or they're exhausted. And so what's interesting, and here they are in case you didn't write all those down. These are the 6 reasons why this happens. I have a 13-year-old. She has exhibited every one of these 6 things, sometimes at the same time. But it's interesting when you think about it. So here's the thing, at 56%, we're stopped. People are stopping moving their applications. We think our engineers don't understand. And so sadly, we treat it like many people who think about English as a second language. And you talk to someone else, have you ever been in another place and you'll see someone talking slower and louder in the same language thinking they're actually making progress? It's amazing to me that people, and I don't know why, it's not any specific culture, it's just slower and louder. Maybe some gesticulation will help, but it generally doesn't really solve the communication gap issue. And so that's what we did. We created more training material and more sessions, and we had devs go to more engineering sessions, and we kept telling them, here, you don't understand. And it turned out, one, they were exhausted, but two, the most important lever we had was the urgency thing. They just didn't feel any sense of urgency to get this done. They'd done enough, they're exhausted, a little entitled, and weren't going any faster. Turns out it's really funny. When you say you're shutting down a data center on this date, and if your app's not moved, it goes down, that creates a sense of urgency. It was awesome. And so, wow, people got re-fired up and ignited and ready to go. The training was helpful, but it was creating a sense of urgency, dealing with the exhaustion thing, and then the other thing, the big thing was the fear and fair thing. Fair, not such a big deal for us. The fear thing about what it meant for your job doing that was a big thing for us to go figure out, particularly for your ops folks. And realizing that in DevOps, there's still roles for everybody, and you get to work on more interesting things, like the AI stuff we do now with data, was something we had to do a better job explaining to people. So I would just say this in our migration was, while the tech capabilities are fantastic, don't lose sight of the FUI, because the FUI is a really, really big deal. And I'll see people look at the edge case, the 5%, as a reason not to do the 95% as opposed to start it. The other thing we learned in this, which is true of any time you have seed change, and at least in my experience in compute models, is the 4 E's. I do not have a slide for this. This is the idea that you experiment, you become effective, you become efficient, and then you exploit a system. And so for us, taking low-risk applications that we could learn a ton from quickly, and then learn how to make those things efficient was great. Then we use that to drive effectiveness, this move everything to PaaS instead. I'm kind of glad we stalled at 56%, which is get us more to PaaS. And then you start exploiting the system. Okay. So can I give just one fun example just to show my age? Voicemail is an example of this. How many people actually have listened to voicemail in the last 2 days? Isn't that amazing? How many of you remember the first time you got an answering machine? What'd you do? Yeah, hung up. Most people hung up. I'm not going to leave my answering machine voicemail on my answering machine. And it turns out the same psychological thing happens. So then you go from not liking them to having 4 of them. One at your office, one at your house, one at your mobile phone. And so now you've gone from being efficient to maybe effective to the day you learn to exploit that system. Now, no show of hands. I don't want anyone to admit this. But if you have ever called a loved one when you knew they weren't there, because you didn't want to have a long conversation, but just let them know you were thinking about it, you've learned to exploit a system. I love my dad. Sometimes I don't have time to talk about that stuff. All right. Second thing on the cloud, biggest learning for us on the FUI in that simple process of working through it. As I mentioned, there are still gaps. There are things that don't, and I don't care which cloud service it is. There are things that just don't work. It's super, super effective for developers. Not designed necessarily at enterprise management capabilities. That's the area where you're seeing the most growth in the last 2 years. So my team created this simple thing called the DevOps Toolkit. In the DevOps Toolkit, there's so many amazing things we can do in our cloud service that we couldn't do on-prem, but we needed a better way to manage this effectively at an enterprise level. And so we created this toolkit, and it's really simple. It just basically has the ability to monitor and check 250 controls in any of your across 30 different Azure services. And most importantly, one, make sure before you actually ship something that all those things are actually done correctly. Number 2, over time, continuously monitor. It's not the numbers here, sorry. It does verification testing. We know it deploys securely straight from VSO when you use this, so you just include this in your library and you run with it. And then you periodically scan the environment. The biggest thing I like about this is it gets drift. Drift is like the nightmare for all people, is just watching systems drift. And so this actually snaps us back off of drift all the time. So in all of our line of business applications now, we run this toolkit. It keeps us off of drift. We get a single dashboard that I can look at across all of them by leader, by application, by function to see if people have drifted or moved off that on the set of controls. And we can make a bunch of data-driven, go back to my data platform, make a bunch of improvements both in the process for our developers and engineers who are building things, but also in the measurement and monitoring capabilities of the system. It's a really, really good tool. The key to it, though, is, and you can say, well, that's great for you, Bret. And it is. It's my job. But my team is really cool. So this is open source. Anybody can get it. And a number of companies are consulting using this as a way to go do it. But most importantly, in my partnership, this is where I have this wonderful partnership because I do work at Microsoft, all this capability will be built natively into Azure. It won't be something you have to go do on the external. But if you need to do these things now, you can use it. I believe the Rusinovich, the CTO in Azure, loves it. And I believe within 18 months, all this capability will be there. But it's something you should go take a look at. Just look up DevOps Toolkit, and you can. There's about 500 different companies today who are using it. But it's a really good example of when you think of DevOps, you also have to make sure you're considering what the enterprise management capability of that system is, and then also not just at an app level, but at the config level, how do you make sure you're not drifting on these things? And so I think this is a really good thing we learned and built out in our team, and then we made it available to you all to use this in any way you want. Anyone using this, by the way? Have you ever used this, Mark? You've looked at it? You should use it. You should use it. Take a look. It's been super helpful for our teams. So that was one of the toolkits. I think that's super helpful for us in this perspective. Another one is big. So remember the stool. By the way, the DevOps Toolkit actually plays against all three parts of the stool. It's data and telemetry. It does a bunch of identity work for us, including alt accounts, as well as a bunch of health attestation. On the securing, in the pure identity space, I'm going to spend a few minutes because I think, I don't know, our data would show us a lot of people have overly entitled administrative privileges in their environment. Nothing. You guys all get locked down and handled. Awesome. I will tell you, we saw a massive opportunity to increase our security of our administrators, and in particularly in the DevOps model, where you have a lot of people who now have admin access because we're doing real-time work in production systems. And so how do we want to go down that path? And so there's a couple of ways to do it. I'm going to talk about two things that we did inside that I find interesting. Some of them you may want to do, and some of them you may not. Because I won't lie, some of these are expensive. And so it just depends on how you think about what your risk level and risk tolerance is. And so as an example, let me go back for a second. Number one, just like we did on moving apps to the cloud, get rid of people who don't need to, just get rid of the over-entitled local admin account stuff. But you just got to do that. And so it's a grind. It's a long tail of work to go do. But it's there's lots of ways using FUI to motivate people not to need their administrative accounts. And there's things we need to do in systems so you don't need administrative privileges. I'm not confused by that. But so we took the same approach, which was, number one, reduce the number of standing admins. Number two, if you're going to be a standing admin, either vault or JIT into the system. Number three, if you're going to vault or JIT into the system, so you have less people with standing privilege, people with less time with a better audit trail if they do have to be in there. And if they have to be in there, they're on a separate identity system for production than we do for everybody else. So we have completely different identity systems to reduce blast radius in the response side. And in addition to separate identity system for us, so again, the funnel just gets smaller and smaller, right? Less people, less privilege, less time, better audit, and then lastly, this super secure device. The only way they can connect to it is this really ridiculously secure device. It is not a device that you'll want to give to your average user. And so I'm going to walk you through that scenario, the stuff we built there. Okay? So securing the administrators. First is remove a lot of them. Seems obvious. This is not clicking for me very well, which is probably okay. There we go. Just need a little flair. Nice. I still got it. So you'll see here, too many ads, too many admins, and too many ads. Credential theft, walk down the path. So for us, was to get to 0 persistent admins in the environment. No persistent admins anywhere in the environment. Then MFA, and then alt accounts and JIT, everywhere for production systems. And again, we chose administrator first. We'll do the same thing for dev. But first thing was anyone who has admin privilege to any of the environment. Obviously, malware and phishing. As we started this session, we know people are still susceptible to those things. And so making sure that we did whitelisting and code integrity on the devices. For mismanaged passwords, our ultimate goal is get rid of passwords, but vault. And then in the deployment threat, secure the supply chain. So in this scenario, what I'm talking about is, so we built a set of devices and an ecosystem to manage anybody who touched production. So any of the systems that you count on us for cloud services, this requires, which should make you feel better about the things you're putting in our environment. But it's not, so the environment is, the OEMs have to build a special image for us in this case, and you can do these, that the people can flatten and rebuild and always have it secure the whole time. It's never a chain of custody. At first we had to do it by hand. We would take it in and we'd white glove every box. We changed the manufacturing process so that we get the bits, and they from pre-boot all the way up through, nothing is ever intercepted or done anything, so we secured the supply chain in these things. Second, again, all using non-production user account systems, all using the separate identity system. Third, they only run signed code, including scripts. So the device is extremely locked down. It's in the main portion of the PC in the host, and only signed code. Awesome. Can only talk to a certain number of network connection points, which we control, which whitelist everywhere you can go, because you do have to do some things on the internet. And so we whitelist, VPN, and monitor all of that. The system that collects all the data for these services is it's a level 4 data center that we can't even go into. Only data gets exfilled back out of it for us for doing monitoring, alerting, and capabilities. And the whitelisting is probably the hardest thing, especially for the engineering people. So what you do is you build this machine that has this incredible lockdown image and has to be pinned back through a bunch of environments to make sure that everything works. We're a global company, so we have to have 3 of these data centers running. The third one's coming up in Asia, so we don't have latency and network time for people running through this stuff. And then we build a VM, which is the InfoWorker VM, because while you're doing a live site action, you still have to do some things in your mail and other things, so you drop over to the VM. So the main host is completely locked down, and then you have a VM that can go run that. It's a system that we built. The expense side of it is the data center side, and we're working with the Azure team to build a service that you could go do this, and we think that'll be, if customers find it interesting, we'll build it for them. But depending on how much you want to take care of your admins, this is a pretty good service to go build. And even if you take a few of the things out of it, this is where, to be fair, we originally were just going to run a separate machine, which is any production person who just carry a separate device. Our users got very upset and said, no, I don't want to carry 2 devices. We only want to carry 1. And hey, we're going to put Hyper-V in Windows 10 anyway. Why wouldn't you just do this virtualization model? Which we did. But we learned a lot. 30 of the 31 bugs I found had nothing to do with the security stuff. They were just things that Hyper-V was designed for servers, not for roaming laptops. And so it turns out there was a problem with network protocols and transitions, and we worked with the industry to go fix that. So there's some pretty cool stuff that you learn that make just, the other really fun thing we learned, which has been great, this is recorded, right? Okay, so let me tell you something we learned in an appropriate way. Virtualizing a laptop is a lot different than a server. We're going back to I'm getting overpaid for saying, this will get me what did my daughter say? A gold medal in the Olympics of duh. Yes, we know it's harder. The big thing, though, a bunch of things that, while we thought about it, hadn't really made sense to us. Like, when you run an InfoWorker VM and then a main host like that, there's no way for the InfoWorker VM to talk to or be aware or have any arbitration what goes on in that. So when you run, for example, Skype in your InfoWorker session and you want to use hardware acceleration, you can't. And when you want to spin down a battery for power saving, you can't, because you don't know what another VM is doing. And so battery life on these machines was half. So there's a bunch of really cool work that we have to go do now to make that scenario work a lot better. So there was some trade-off in doing it. But again, the learning we got from how to improve the virtualization capability so people could use it for all kinds of different things was pretty amazing. And so this is one of those projects, again, we can give you more detail on it, but I think is a super interesting part of how we think about the problem. And this is just a quick view of it. So, who makes this stuff up? And this is just showing how the enforcement works. We have this high-risk environment edge, which is a thing I said we can't go in or out of. And then we just do a bunch of network ACLing and a bunch of IPsec. And we run everything through a VPN. And everything is just, the easiest way to say it is everything's just locked down. It's crazily locked down. So you have IP-based isolation. You have machine identity. Because remember when I said identity is key, it's not just identity of user, but identity of device and identity of application. So the machine identity for us is super important in this. The machine identity is locked to a user. You can't transition it. Someone else can't log into it, right? Okay, and then user identity, and then the health and compliance state all the time on the perimeters. We always know what the health and compliance of it is. If anything happens in the supply chain, for example, when Meltdown and Spectre happened, this was the first systems we went and updated and blanket and mass finished and fixed those. So that's a big part of that. Okay, that's the SAW. I like the SAW. I'm sure everyone liked them as much at first, but now they love them. Now, how do we get rid of passwords? Eliminating passwords. Now, I know there were some announcements today or yesterday about the authenticator being available. We've been using that for quite some time. In the Learn, Share, Connect model, originally, as I said, we used to keep talking about this as MFA, and people didn't really like that view. And then we realized, even with the SAWs, don't let perfect be the enemy of good or better. And so many people may not do all the things we did in a SAW, but there's a lot of things that are in there that you can use that don't, there's this sort of incremental cost and return on value you'll get, and just depending on how your risk tolerance works. But in passwords, we changed the way we talked about it. I said, listen, let's start thinking about eliminating, and then we'll keep calling it eliminating passwords because the propensity for people to change paradigm is tough. It's really eliminating prompting is one of the first things you want to do. And the reason why I differentiate this is when we start thinking about this as two paths. One, make the user experience not have passwords, but there's still passwords underlying the system. It's the same way you do machine-to-machine identity today. There's just a really complex password that's applying to the machine, and it goes back and forth, and they authenticate all the time. So why don't we do the same idea for users? And there's a lot of things you have to go do in this, which, again, having someone who does a lot of social engineering and has some sort of sociology or psychology degree and that you can work with on how people behave is super helpful in these conversations. And so this is a simple path of the things that we were building, which was our approach to a passwordless world was first, get the password replacement offerings done, right? Reduce the visible passwords to the user. So when we think about Hello for Business or the Azure authentication application, which we use, the idea was, which I think is great, stop talking about MFA and start talking about users not having to enter passwords. And so this thing that, that you're the password is, I think, an awesome idea. And so we said, hey, with Windows Hello, you can, and we also were really adamant about, this is where diversity really comes into play, diversity and inclusion, which is you can't just bet on fingerprint. It just doesn't work, right? There's a whole lot of reasons why you can't do that. Not to mention medical reasons, doctors with rubber gloves on, like a whole bunch of scenarios that just don't work. So we said, let's make sure that it's open so we can do facial, we can do fingerprint, we could do voice. If there's lots of different things we could do. There's heart rhythm stuff you can do. And so the idea was to make it open so that any of those proofing models, if they meet a certain criteria, could be used. That was number one. Then get it deployed. So now remember, there's still a password, but the user only has to use the biometrics to get into the system, which is really good. And so once we separated the two problems of the system level, and this wonderful man who works on my team who's here, who may be in the room, he always says, we're not going to get rid of passwords for 5 years. I said, yeah, I know. As the AD administrator, that is true. There will still be something behind it, but our users won't see it. They'll never know it's there. So I get better security. I get a better user experience, and eventually we'll get to where there's no password in AD at all. It'll just be a cert there, and so we'll get to that model. But don't wait 5 years when you can make everyone's lives better and get better security in the meantime. So this idea of, okay, so now we get Windows Hello. For all of our non-Hello enabled systems, use the Authenticator on the phone app, which is a great thing for us to go do. What was interesting and we didn't expect was people's reaction to not seeing a password prompt. It was really bizarre. Even people who had Hello-enabled devices and had enrolled in Hello still kept going in and using their password. Like, this is where we had to make the system smarter and go, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. And keep training them how to do that, because we had a stall rate that people weren't, even though they were enabled, enrolled, they were still entering a password. And so, we had to go through with the data, go through and make a bunch of changes to make that all go happen. And so for us, we have two systems. Hello for the systems that are enabled, and then the authenticator for the ones that are not. Now, this is where... I'll tell this story. Why not? Many of you have seen some situations that have been going on with SMS spoofing and messaging that's been happening. There are only 5 services in the globe that process SMS messages. One of those services was owned by an adversary, which causes immediate concern for anybody doing SMS messages. Also, there have been a number of people who have been doing this EID hijacking, where they shut down your service. T-Mobile had this problem, all public stuff, so I don't do anything, have this problem where they end up shutting down your account or suspending it, re-enabling it to a device they own, and then can use SMS to do financial transactions. So the good thing, again, about having choice is with Authenticator, you could do SMS auth, you could do phone callback auth, or you could use the application to do auth. Now, my team did the threat assessment, and while I appreciate it does all 3, we said no way would we ever do SMS internally. The product will do it, you can do it, that's fine. For our risk level, if you think about the way I built the SAW, there was no way I was going to do the SMS thing. It's just too easy to get in the middle of that. So it's not that it's not secure, it's just different levels of what your comfort is with it. So I remember getting called in to an important meeting going, how exposed are we? 0 in this situation, because we don't use that feature. We use the native capability built into the application. And now, with all the FIDO2.0 work we're doing, the ability for both Windows and the Authenticator app to be FIDO2.0 compliant, I think we'll see it even have better acceptance for non-Microsoft platforms. So our first platform of choice, of course, is Windows Hello, because it's the most seamless. I just walk up to my desk, and it knows me, and I start working. And I don't have to do it. And if I use a different system, which I do, then I'll use my Authenticator app on my phone, and I can do bio there, or I can do PIN. And then we also had to educate people on PINs. Like, why is a PIN better than a password? Well, because a PIN is only local. It can't be used remotely. It has to be on at the device. It doesn't transition or travel with you, and it can't be used by an adversary in a remote location. It has to be actually attached to the device. So again, there was just a ton of education that we had to do for our user base, which was a better experience. So now we're, upwards of 90% of the people don't use a password when they come into the environment and come to work. And they love it. Guess what? New problem. What is that new problem? Huh? No one knows their passwords, right? Number 1 help desk call for most companies is password reset calls, right? And so you get self-service password manager, which we have one and everyone has them, and that's awesome. And you redirect people to go do that. And so, yeah, people forgot their passwords, which is a really good problem to have. I wish I had this shirt. It said, I'm going to wear it next time. It just says, I drink because your password is password. And so it's a great shirt for 2 reasons. 1, it's funny, and 2, it allows me to drink. So they're never going to let me talk here again. But again, once we separated this thing about that you get rid of the prompting for the users, that's fantastic. But so then we did this work and research and figured out, hey, we know they've forgotten passwords, and we rotate approximately every 70-something days. And we said, what would it take to just not do that rotation anymore? Because a lot of the research will tell you it doesn't really work. It's a bad idea. It's like putting rock in a river, just the water goes around it. And so I think this month, what month are we? September, yes. This month, we transitioned our password rotation policy to be once a year, not once every 72 days. And we will be more secure because of it, which is awesome. Now, here's a little lesson I learned. If the people here from Microsoft, I could have just said we don't have to change it at all. We could just leave it for as long as you're here, and assuming there's no reason to reset it, other reasons to reset it. And I learned I won't explain the whole story that I learned from our CFO, but I realized people were so happy it was going from 4 times a year to once a year. There was no point in telling them it was forever, because if I ever had to retract it, it'd be really hard. Now, if I can get past a year, they're really happy. Then next year I get to tell them again, hey, we're just going to turn off the rotation altogether. I've made them happy twice. That's a good thing. It is a simple lesson I learned, but it is really important. And it is funny. We'll do our exec retreat. Say, hey, this is the last time you're going to set your password, barring any situations. It creates great energy. That is one that creates really good energy. Now, it turns out, though, in order to do that rotation change, which we've wanted to do for a long time, we needed something you could only do at cloud scale. So let me take a second and share with you about, because many of you are thinking, that's crazy, you shouldn't do that. Or maybe you aren't, I'm not sure. Yeah, you probably are. Let me talk to you about how we get to our full security promise, which is, and more importantly, how we can do this password change and why it took me as long as it did. Password spray is the problem, right? So this is this issue, and I'll walk through it quickly. I think there's a lot of build in this thing. This was, again, identity is critical for me, and password spray is the thing I'm most worried about. So the idea is you basically have 3 types of attacks you'll usually see that have been pretty prevalent. I think you're all pretty familiar. Brute force, just throw everything at it, super loud. Almost any system's going to pick this up, right? So that's pretty normal. Dictionary, which is you just use a combination of common words, multiple guesses against a broad set of targets, also fairly loud. Remember my data and telemetry piece? This is still a pretty loud thing. You usually see it happening. Password spray, on the other hand, is not loud. It is a low and slow technique that is very effective, that preys on people's ability to be predictable, which is that essentially you go after a small number of really common passwords on a very limited try per account basis, so it just looks like a failed login. So I would go after your account twice with, so we're in Florida. Tampa Bay almost won last night on the football game. So if you're from Seattle, we have a football team there. For people who are not familiar, this is not the world version of football, the American version of football, called the Seahawks. And not surprisingly, capital S Seahawks 2018 is a complex password. A lot of employees that live in the proximity of said team use that password. And so the idea is you get rid of common passwords, because it turns out the password spray technique has been taking off. Like, this is the beautiful thing about cloud capability. What is the list of common passwords? And you know, when you do 400 billion auths a month without violating any privacy rules, you can learn what really common passwords are. And so you can build a common password list, you can feed that into your Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, and you can ban those from being used by your user base. And that allows you, once you have that capability, you can go to a rotation password, you can go to a rotation of once a year, because that's the one that will, that's the thing that will get you. And so let me tell you how we built this technique to detect password spray using really cool cloud scale machine learning and then local intelligence. Because remember, Seahawks 2018 probably wouldn't be a big password in Tampa, as an example, or dare I say the Patriots, but I won't go there. And so there's different ones, and so you have to, in the stuff we're building now, there'll be all the global machine learning common password stuff we'll do, and then there'll be what's local to you, because it could be your company, for that matter. You may have something about your company in specific that people would want to go use. And so you can build this banned list and integrate the best of cloud learning with local knowledge, and then come up with a banned list that allow you to do this one-year spray. And so here's what we did. The easy part is getting usernames. They're free, or you can pay for them, but it's not hard to get a set of usernames for most people's companies. The second thing that happens in here, so the attacker in this case, large set of accounts with a small set of guessable passwords, right? And here's what's really interesting about it. All they have to do is get a successful return, and it confirms it's valid. They don't actually have to log in and do anything with it or go anywhere with it. If it comes back successful, they now know it, and they put it off in a system that says this username with this password is successful, and we can go try a bunch of stuff with that in the future. And so in our case, OneDrive for Business or other things, if you didn't have MFA, so if you have MFA, like people say MFA eliminates phishing. No, it doesn't. It eliminates the blast radius of it, right? It eliminates your ability to go do anything with it. So in this case, you don't have a compromised account, you have a compromised password, which you don't want to have, but you want to make sure if that ever happened, you can't go anywhere. So I want to make sure they just never happen. I want to be able to detect them right away and change them out if I need to, right? So this is where you need the filter to be implemented so that people can't use these easily guessable passwords, because they prey on this fact that people have easily guessable passwords. Remember, not complexity, easily guessable. Winter 2018. I mean, there's a lot of these things, and it's crazy when you see some of the lists. So I'll put my T-shirt on next time I come back. I drink because your password is Seahawks 2018. One other thing we learned in this process, though, I think the problem the industry still hasn't solved is the in-person proofing problem. And I know lots of companies are working on this. We have seen adversaries become very effective if you have a manager approval process for how to spoof managers to get you to do a reset password, right? And so simple things like they'll call 3 or 4 times the same manager.
and then they'll change it to be a phone number from the same area code and prefix as the individual because they find that, and then you've seen callers do this, and then managers go, oh, it must be them, and move it through. And so how do we implement that? And I can talk about some of the stuff we're doing there. And then lastly, if you have the password filter, you have MFA, you have strong proofing, then you're really in a really great state. And so this is the stuff we were building. This is, I don't know how, getting the password list is something that's in preview for you today. The ability to tie these two things together will be something you'll be able to do right away. But the thing that I find really frustrating in this, and I'm not here to pitch Secure Scorecard, but when I look at the results and I look at the number of people that don't have MFA enabled in their company, it's just mind-numbing to me. I realize the idea is don't do MFA, make MFA frictionless like the stuff we've been doing. We can still do more work to help. You have to do that. Because if you can't stop the password spread, you can at least stop it from going anywhere with MFA. I mean, password's useless if you have that scenario built out. And so this was a simple model, which all we did was take all of our both our failures and our successes in ADFS, feed them into the Active Directory via Connect Health, the ADIP stuff that we use today, and then we just have algorithms that detect the spray attempt. So now I see every attempt that ever happens, which is awesome. And I know exactly where they've gone after. And I can also then, with orchestration and automation, I can say, hey, we think you may have an issue. We're just going to reset your password anyway, just to be sure. Even though they can't go anywhere, I still want to make sure. I'm paid to be paranoid, so that's what we do. But how do you automate it so it doesn't take a lot of operational cost and keep you in that environment? And then we just roll this into stuff that you'll get to go use. But you couldn't have done this with just, if you have a massive AD of your own, you couldn't do this. You have to have cloud scale authentication to get to these lists, then integrate that into your local stuff to make that actually work for you. And so it's one of the examples where this cloud stuff is pretty amazing. And then we do a massive enrichment and investigation against these, both using this big data platform I mentioned we use. We also take our phone auth and registration data and pump that into the system. And then the O365 threat intelligence, which has been super helpful. And as they mentioned here, we now have one platform. So my analysts don't have to use one for Office and one for Azure. We just go to one platform for all our hunters. And again, taking all that signal and driving that back to where a year ago, I had to explain to our board about what my concerns were about password spray, and now I feel very good about where we are with password spray. I never feel we're great. We never have every problem solved, but we have capabilities that just weren't heretofore possible without cloud and some of the stuff we're doing. And so with simple MFA, you're off and running. And so that was one of the other examples I thought was kind of cool. This is actually just a simple way of saying I use a lot of our products. You can look at the list later. I will tell you that the Defender ATP is the tool that my Security Operations Center, and now the integration with Office Threat Protection, is the tool they most love as far as getting intelligence and working on that. Second most valuable tool is we built a private system for collecting WEF events. You shouldn't do that. Defender ATP will do all of that for you. And so I feel pretty good about that. This was really just to tell you that we use a lot of our products. We like them. I love Defender ATP. I love AD. I love ADFS. O365, now with the scorecard and some other things, I think are doing a great job. Our ability to do MFA in there is great. I had an interesting conversation at RSA last year on an elevator. A forensic threat firm based in the Silicon Valley happened to be on the elevator. Although I know the CEO really well, this person didn't know I worked for Microsoft and was touting about Office 365 and 2FA and it not being on, and so I decided to, be nice. Tell me a little more about this undocumented API you're using to do your forensic analysis. So he walked me through it. It wasn't undocumented, but it was a very cool piece of analysis. And I said, well, what's your recommendation? And he goes, well, here's what I think Microsoft should do. I don't understand on the MFA why they don't charge for it. Now, I don't know anything about our licensing, so I apologize. But I'm assuming there's some place we're charging for something, right? Because we charge for something, I have a job, so thank you for buying our products. I am a cost center. So I thought he was just saying we should start charging for it. So I thought, maybe I should bring this to the business meeting. What's the appetite for eliminate passwords? People might pay for. Enforcing 2FA? Probably not. But I'm thinking about it, and then he throws the kicker to me. He goes, no, don't charge for 2FA. Charge every customer who doesn't turn it on for 2FA. I said, okay, that's brilliant. There's no way we could get away with doing that, but that is brilliant. He goes, help people from shooting themselves in the foot. So, man, that's why we use these things. So with that, I wanted to spend a few minutes, as I said, talking about how we simplified the strategy, our approach to protecting the company, and just give you some examples of when we step back and look at being vision-led and creating visions like no passwords, or secure the administrator stuff that we were doing, or even the DevOps toolkit. Some of the capabilities that you either can go get today that go beyond the products, or that will be integrated in soon, that are awesome. I think they're very good. I probably should have done a comparison, but I didn't want to do a compete comparison. I do think it's really important, though, in the role that we do have to honor the past. Like, I hear people say, why would you ever have done that? Like, why would you count on firewalls to solve all your problems and not think about other things? Because in the past, that was the right thing to do. It's operating system agnostic. It's the single choke point. It's why you use procurement for contract negotiation, because you have a single choke point for those things. And so be fair about the things that happened in the past. We have legacy. I have a ton of legacy. I have lots of legacy that people don't realize. And so how do you isolate legacy or deal with legacy? How do you move people forward? So I don't want to just throw the past away. Be honest about where we are now, right? The threatscape's changed a lot. This supply chain thing is going to be a real problem. And I think we're going to have more work to do. I didn't get to spend a lot of time on what we're going to do there. But be honest about where you are with your program and prioritize and simplify it, right? You're not going to be, unless you have unlimited budget, and even if you did, there's a physics problem in how many things you can go tackle. So pick the ones that presently are the most important things to go work on. And that's always a combination of how much is legacy and looking in the rearview mirror that you have to just go clean up hygiene-wise, and how much is future-proofing yourself from things that are coming? Like, are you making decisions that you do now that 3 years from now you'll regret, like non-agile crypto or something like that? And then, honestly, this is the first year I think I really feel like I've always had some hope for the future, but some of the stuff I'm seeing with the machine learning and the AI stuff that we're doing on the data sets and the telemetry we get, and the stuff I just showed you around the password spray and some of those things, they just weren't possible before. The stuff I do on Insider Threat, which I didn't talk about here, I couldn't do with SharePoint on-prem. I can do with SharePoint online. There's a bunch of different things like that that just weren't possible. So again, honor the past, be honest about where you are in the present, and I'm hopeful that this will give you some hope for the future. Thank you very much. Have a good day.